Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Crime is over in Canada. There is no more crime. No one is breaking into cars, houses, stealing cars. No one is vandalizing your property. No one's shooting up on the streets. No one is stealing something to buy drugs. No, prostitution's gone. Murder's gone. It's all gone. It's all gone, at least in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. This is what I can glean from a story I saw on the weekend, a press release from the Moose Jaw Police Service. Now, I've been to Moose Jaw. It's a lovely little community, has the old Al Capone tunnels, has a beautiful thermal spa atop a hotel. I didn't know it was so idyllic that crime is over there. This is the Moose Jaw Police Service news release. In recent weeks, the Moose Jaw Police Service has seen an increase in adolescents playing doorbell pranks on residents within the city. The prank, commonly known as Ding Dong Ditch or Nicky Nicky Nine Doors, involves a person ringing the doorbell of a house and then running away before the door can be answered. Reports of this prank have occurred in the late evening, and in some instances, this is my police blotter voice, and in some instances, the early morning hours. If adolescents are found committing this action, officers may give a warning, but serious consequences could occur for repeat offenders, such as being charged criminally. The Moose Jaw Police Service asked children and adolescents to refrain from performing this prank on residences. We are encouraging parents to talk with their children about the ramifications of performing this type of prank, and if you witness this prank being performed, you have to report it to police. Now, I don't think I'm really curmudgeonly. I'm marginally curmudgeonly because I realize that I crossed a certain threshold, and now when my nephews are over at my house, I'm the family member that's like, don't touch that, don't run over there. So I'm not as fun as I used to be. But of all the things that kids could be doing to get into trouble, I actually long for the days when Nicky Nicky Nine Doors was all that kids were doing. I saw a video going viral. I don't know where it was from. It was from somewhere in the States where these two 12-year-old kids were fishing in a pond. And some homeowner association, Karen, came out after them. And this guy just screamed at the kids, got into their faces, snapped one of their fishing rods in half. And, was yelling at them about how they were trespassing and this and that. And I'm thinking, my goodness, with all the things that kids could get up to these days, why are we making the things that we're glad they're doing problematic? Like Nicky Nicky Nine Doors, sure, it's annoying. If they're targeting one house over and over again, maybe you have to deal with it. In fact, it's a lot riskier. I never did. I don't want to say never. I may have done it once. I'm having a vague flashback to this. Send the Moose Jaw Police after me. It's a lot riskier now than it was when I was a kid because you've got these Ring cameras now that take pictures of people at the door. So when you go to do the Nicky Nicky Nine Dooring and you see the Ring camera, you should just move along and pick another house. You have to use only the old analog doorbells, or better yet, one of those big brass knockers. But anyway, the thing, again, as far as things kids could be doing, the big brass knockers could get a lot worse. But the one thing that I would say here, like Moose Jaw, just get over it. Like, this probably happened to 4 people, and this is probably like a dad putting his kid up to it because the dad was all nostalgic about the pranks of yore. So it could get a lot worse there. But if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. We'll read a couple of those comments later on. What are the other things? I mean, toilet papering houses, that one, I don't know if kids still do that anymore. I think my brother might have done that. I should be careful. My nephews, I think, sometimes listen to the show. Nope, my brother never did anything of the sort. But anyway, that's today in Moose Jaw crime. I do want to talk a little bit about the Calgary Stampede over the weekend. Now, first, I'll begin with a confession. I have never been to the Calgary Stampede. Never. I have never been. I've always wanted to go. Every time I've wanted to go, something has come up and I haven't been able to. This year, I was hoping to go, and then I waited too long, and then I looked, and like hotels were going to be $1 bajillion a night to go there, and I thought better of it. But apparently everyone I knew was at the Stampede. I was getting all these like pictures texted to me and emailed to me from people. I'm like, you're at the, even people that work for True North. And I'm like, hang on, you work for me, and now I just blink one day and you're at the Calgary Stampede. But anyway, I hope everyone had a great time. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre gave what by all accounts was a barn burner of a speech. I watched the speech on YouTube, and one of the things that I found to be remarkable about it was how consistent the message has been. how consistent the message has been. And I wanted to take a bit of a bigger picture look at this, because what Poilievre is doing right now is really thumbing his nose at the people who have said for the last 10 years how conservatives are quote unquote supposed to be. And he's doing so in a way that I think makes it worth a bit of a bigger picture analysis of what's going on. And let me just first play. This is one of the clips from Pierre Poilievre's speech at the Calgary Stampede this weekend, in which he talks about the so-called woke ideology he says is ruining Canada.
People look around the country and they don't recognize the place. Housing costs have doubled, meaning 3/4 of youth believe they'll never be able to afford a home. No home means no family. Means no kids. When they go to the grocery store, they cry at the checkout because they can't afford the price tag. We now have 2 million people lined up at food banks. The Food Bank Association says 25% of Canadians now live below the poverty line, a record-smashing number. You think it's bad out here? There are now 256 homeless encampments in Toronto. 50 opened in 3 months alone. Scenes that we would only have imagined in a third world country before Trudeau and the NDP took office and instituted a weird, woke ideology that not only seeks to take our money, punish our work, tax our food, and undermine our entrepreneurs, but also destroys our education, dishonors our history, and divides our people. But the good news is life was not like this before Justin Trudeau, and it won't be like this after he's gone.
He takes aim at so-called woke ideology that he puts at Justin Trudeau's feet, and I think probably with good reason for that, as destroying Canada. He talks about very real struggles, and again, it's interesting because if you watch that and you're a conservative partisan, you're a culture warrior type, you're going to hear woke ideology and go, yeah! But if you're an ordinary Canadian that's not tied to this thing, that doesn't even know what wokeness is, you're hearing him talk about the struggle of being able to afford groceries, the struggle of being able to find a home. And this is how he's bridging these two divides. He's bridging the divide between the conservative base and people in the so-called center in Canada that are not necessarily tied to a party or an ideology, but are accessible and available to conservative voters. This is why he's doing so well in the polls, because he's communicating to these people. He's speaking about these challenges in a way that people desperately need someone to be, because they're certainly not getting it from the government. But he's talking about the issues that all of the so-called elites and all of the pundits and the media class, the media party, as our friend Ezra Levant says, he talks about all these issues that you're not supposed to talk about. Like, for example, him talking about guns. Take a look.
You know, and then there's the guns, right? So Justin Trudeau wants to ban Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle, but he only inspects, CBSA inspects 1% of shipping containers that come into this country. No wonder that our cars are being stolen and shipped overseas. So here's my common sense plan for that. We're going to have scanners that actually scan what's inside the shipping containers. Right? Can you imagine that? Shocking, eh? So that if the manifest says that inside the shipping containers is some widgets, but the scanner shows that it's a beamer, well, then you take the box, you put it aside, you remove the beamer, you open it up and you look at the VIN, you call the name of the guy who's matched to the VIN, you say, hey, were you planning to send your beamer off to Dubai? No, I wasn't. I just noticed it was missing from the front of my house. Okay, great. Well, you can come get it because it's at the port. And we're going to now call the guy who booked the shipping container. We're going to go to his house and say, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Right? Pretty simple. And you know how we're going to pay for that? You know we're going to pay for it. We're going to forego spending $2 to $7 billion going after law-abiding, licensed, trained, and tested firearms owners.
Again, talking about gun owners, gun ownership, but doing it in a way that resonates with that political center. He talks about crime. He talks about people's cars that are getting stolen and put on shipping crates and right now not even getting detected. And if it does, people are not able to get these vehicles back because you have a society and an institutional structure that's just decided to throw up its hands and say, this is what life in Canada is now about. And there was one more clip I wanted to play. This is tied to an issue we talked about on the show last week, and we'll be touching on a little bit with our friend Kris Sims in a moment. But he talks about how he's going to deal with Justin Trudeau's censorship regime. And there's also a little bit of an add-on to his view on firearms in this clip as well.
NDP Liberal socialist hate hunting because it symbolizes independence and self-reliance. The attack on our freedoms over the last 9 years is unprecedented in Canadian history. We've seen it through censorship laws, both C11 and now C63, a law that creates a three-headed bureaucracy that can actually put you under house arrest, not for something you've said, but under suspicion of something you might say in the future that would cause harm to someone else's feelings. Meanwhile, we see this woke censorship play out on our university campuses. Common sense conservatives will stand up for the freedom of expression. I will repeal C11, C63, and require universities that get federal funding to respect freedom of expression.
So we have him decrying censorship, decrying woke ideology, defending law-abiding firearms owners. There was lots more in the speech. I didn't want to just play the whole thing because then it wouldn't be the Andrew Lawton show anymore. It would be the Pierre Poilievre Power Hour, which, again, if you want, you can just go and watch the speech he gave after the show. But he talks about all these things that, again, the media elites tell you you're not supposed to. And it's interesting because the Liberals love talking about abortion. They love talking about guns. They love talking about the conservative link with hate speech and radicalism and all of that. Poilievre is not avoiding these issues. He's not doing this instinct that conservative strategists have historically said and that Aaron O'Toole was known for, which is just shrinking the debate to just one or two issues. Oh, we can say more money in your pocket. We can say lower taxes. And you can say that, and everyone is supposed to just forget about all these other issues. You don't, what do you think about free speech? No, it doesn't matter. We're going to put more money in your pocket. But what about my gun rights? The Liberals want to take them away. What are you going to do? Well, more money in your pocket. And it becomes laughable. It becomes laughable. I can't remember if I came up with it or if it was someone else. So I'm prepared to say it might not have been my idea. But you have a Conservative Party that has historically wanted to be Justin Trudeau with a slightly better accountant. The one that I did come up with is a prime minister that wants to be an auditor-in-chief instead of a prime minister. And it's very dangerous to adopt that thinking. And conservatives, generally speaking, do not look upon the O'Toole years in a particularly favorable light. In fact, the period in which O'Toole was the leader in my book about Pierre Poilievre, the title of the chapter is The Troubles, with all due respect to our Northern Irish and Irish listeners and viewers. But I call it The Troubles because that's really historically in the Conservative Party's history, this tumultuous period that in recent memory anyway, has left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And why I bring that up is because the O'Toole years are useful in the sense that they show us what happens when we do it the way the left wants us to. They show us what happens when we give the left everything they want. We give the media everything they want. We put up a moderate conservative leader that has no particular view on social issues that is favorable to social conservatives, that doesn't want to talk about things that the conservative base wants to talk about, that offers his own conservative alternative to the carbon tax instead of rejecting it. And what happens? He gets exactly the same level of support as Andrew Scheer got, and that's that. So there's a reason the Conservatives showed Aaron O'Toole the door. And there's a reason that Pierre Poilievre won such a resounding margin in the leadership race. And you fast forward now, he has not done this pivot that you often see from conservative leaders when they're in the leadership race to afterwards. Remember, Andrew Scheer, during his leadership race in 2017, had mused about possibly getting rid of CBC's news division, but it was nowhere to be found in his platform. Aaron O'Toole came out right out of the gate on his leadership platform and said, we need to defund the CBC. And I was like, yes, defund the CBC. And then he was the leader and he says, okay, we need to possibly look at striking a committee that will analyze ways that could modernize the CBC business model. I'm like, that's a heck of a lot longer than defund the CBC. And at the end of reading it, I'm more confused about what you believe. So here we have a conservative leader. And again, whether you vote conservative or not is up to you. I'm not pushing you to vote one way or another, but I'm making a point as someone who has followed conservative politics for many, many years in this country, who's been involved in it at various points, that we're seeing something dramatically different from the norm right now, in that there is a conservative leader who is unprepared to capitulate and do what every other conservative advisor and strategist over the last decade has, not every, but what many of them have advised. He's not willing to do that. Instead, he is saying, this is what I believe, this is who we are, and my message is the same. And what was interesting is that I did a bunch of interviews when my book came out. And whenever you were speaking to like a local host in Halifax or Quebec or something, there would always be a question about what is his win going to mean for people here? And it's a fair question. And what I found most interesting is that I couldn't actually find, when I looked, that much variation between the message that Poilievre gives in this city to this city, in this country, or this part of the country to that part of the country. The message is pretty consistent in English and in French, in Atlantic Canada, in Alberta. And that's why these things are unifying, because Canadians want authenticity. Canadians want a leader they can peg. They want a leader they can understand their perspectives on issues on. And you get that with him. And it's a reason he's doing so well. So obviously the next election is still over a year away, most likely. But the Poilievre leadership experiment so far, if you want to call it that, tells us that everything the elites told you about conservative politics was wrong. Not a big surprise, but it's worth making a point of. Let's talk about that censorship aspect of this. We spoke last week on the show about how the government is going to spend $200 million, the parliamentary budget officer says, on establishing this so-called Digital Safety Commission. We need a bureaucracy with 330 people to regulate what you do and say online. And as we noted with Michelle Rempel-Garner, that does not even count the increased workload to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and other organs that are going to be involved in this operation. I believe this is wrong, even if it costs nothing. I believe it's wrong, even if somehow government were to make it profitable. But we'd be remiss to not point out the taxpayer issues here and why $200 million never means $200 million when government starts spending. Our good friend Kris Sims is back. She is the Alberta director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris, hope you had a good weekend. Welcome back.
Yes, I did. We had some family in from out of town, and so I was a little bit unplugged, so I haven't even watched Pierre's speech yet. I got to catch up on that.
And you buried the lead. You were partying with Donnie Wahlberg on the weekend.
Yeah, I was actually. Just this past before the last weekend. Don't get me started. I'll take up your whole show. We went to Salt Lake City and partied with New Kids on the Block. They were really fun, but I did do a little bit of work. Was it ever interesting driving through Montana? Because their state there is in Helena, their state legislature, and I think they only meet like a handful of times per year. So this has got me thinking now, what are taxpayers saving there? And they pay really low taxes. It's open carry, to your point, with firearms rights. So it was quite something. I couldn't turn my work brain off. But yeah, I'm trying to get plugged back in and caught back up. But what really blew my mind was exactly what you just raised, was this censorship industrial complex that the Trudeau government is helping to build here in Canada. The creepy thing is that this is happening, if you look carefully, at a lot of what we would consider Western English-speaking countries. In fact, in UK, Andrew, I think they even called it the Online Harms Bill in the same way we're calling it this. So basically, in a nutshell, they're paying off the mainstream media. They're paying for the CBC. We've got Bill C-11 and we've got Bill C-63. So it creates this censorship vice on free expression here in Canada, this vice grip. And on top of that, you get to pay for it. So, an army of censors doesn't come cheap, right? Taxpayers have to pay for everything. And they're now estimating at the Parliamentary Budget Office that it's going to cost minimum $200 million. And to your point exactly, that's not even touching the massive amount of workload that these human rights tribunals are going to be suddenly flooded with. Can you imagine the snitch culture this is going to encourage? Because you can anonymously call in someone that you think is in the future going to maybe hurt your feelings on the internet. Like, saying it out loud is crazy. If we had been warning about this back in 2015, people would have said that you're out to lunch. But here we are. We're this close from it. So the Taxpayers Federation, we are fighting it on the cost, absolutely, because it's going to cost people a ton of money. And we're fighting it on the free expression angle, because if you can't express yourself freely, guess what? You can't criticize the government, and groups like us would be labeled misinformation like that.
Yeah, just to go back for a second to what you said about the legislatures in the U.S. I ran, as many people may know, for the provincial legislature in Ontario many years ago, and I was chatting with an American friend of mine from New Hampshire who was like baffled to learn they make money, because in New Hampshire a state rep makes $200 a term.
Yeah.
And so $100 a year is the salary of a New Hampshire state rep. And they meet like, I don't know, maybe twice a year or something like that. And my goodness, I would love it if our politicians only had a couple of hours to make it. Because this happened in Texas not long ago, where there was a filibuster, which means something in the US, because if you don't pass your bill by the closing of business on a particular day, then you don't get another chance for like several months. So when it comes to taxing, like I would love that. The Digital Safety Commission wouldn't stand a chance if the government was only there one day a year.
No, exactly. It's funny. Some mainstream media organizations contact us sometimes and ask us like, oh, don't you wish they were still hard at work and still having more sitting days and blah, blah. No, no, don't give them more days to mess things up. You add more government, you mess it up. Same sort of thing goes with these ridiculous salaries that are now being paid at city hall levels in most places across Canada. They're like, oh, boo-hoo, the mayor's only making $200,000 a year, or boo-hoo, the city councilor's only making $120,000. And it's like, no, you realize in New Hampshire, exactly to your point, I think they get like gas and sandwich money. It's very similar in Montana, and a lot of states, a lot of provinces could be running their shops this way.
The most direct analog that I can come up with on costs, not for the Digital Safety Commission itself, but just in general with government, is the long gun registry, which I forget the initial pledge. You might recall better than me, but it was a very paltry sum they said this thing was going to cost, and it ends up being well over $1 billion.
Yes. What's startling is they initially said it'll cost $2 million.
That was it. Yeah, I knew it was something like a rounding error almost.
Little tiny bit. And it almost, once all the smoke cleared and you start adding lawsuits and fights and stuff, it was close to 2 billion with a B. So remember, folks, this is way back with the Chrétien and Martin Liberals, when they had the so-called long gun registry. You probably remember some Reform Party members as a lark were registering their soldering guns successfully. Silly things like that happening, but it was in order to point out what a mockery this really was. It ballooned in cost. It wasn't quite 2 billion, but it was closing in on that. And to Andrew's point exactly, they'll come out and say, oh, this massive group of censorship police that are, run by a bunch of bureaucrats in Ottawa and Gatineau, it'll cost you 200 million. Well, look at what happened with ArriveCan. Like, that little app should have cost around $250,000. It wind up costing us around $60 million. Just imagine how this thing is going to balloon out of hand for a cost. Like, the censorship element's one thing, and then there's a huge waste of money on the other.
Yeah, and the weaponization of complaints is, I think, key here. We're going to be talking in just a few minutes with David Clement on the LCBO strike. And the reason I bring that up is because OPSEU on its website has a little form where you put in your information and you click a button and it automatically sends an email to Doug Ford's office. And these sorts of tools are very common when people are trying to gin up public support. You basically make it so that there's a ready-made form and you can file it and push it, and it sends it off to maybe the Prime Minister's office, maybe the Premier's office, maybe every MP in the country, because people will do this. And this is the exact kind of thing that I know someone will do with the Canadian Human Rights Commission complaint process, where they'll say, someone will make some tool and they'll say, paste the link of the tweet you want to report, and it'll auto-populate a form and send it right to the Human Rights Commission. And all of a sudden you have people that are running these campaigns, because you actually profit. You can make some money if you file a complaint under Bill C-63, assuming it passes, and your complaint is deemed to have standing, even if you were not harmed in any way from it. So no one at the CHRC has said how they're going to prevent against this. And I know, being government, their answer is going to be, we need to hire a legion of investigators to sift through all these things.
Yeah, just imagine. And that's exactly to your point. The censorship police and the amount of online gagging that is going on here from the government, or it's going to happen if this passes, is hard enough to swallow. But the people forget there's a financial incentive to anonymously complaining to a human rights tribunal about your feelings being hurt, So just imagine if people are long in the tooth enough like me. Remember back when Ezra Levant was fighting against the Human Rights Tribunal? I forget for what. He had published Western Standard. Might
Yeah,
have
that
been
was
the old.
the Muhammad cartoons. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the cartoons, right? And I do remember, to their credit, I do remember mainstream Maclean's magazine getting into similar sort of hot water. And like, you know all about that, of course, through Mark Stein. And so imagine that. But now fast forward to today's culture of, getting offended by things, and make it anonymous and give people the opportunity to make thousands of dollars. Boy, oh boy, like they did not. I hope I'm saying this right. I hope they didn't think this through. I hope it's this much of a disaster because they're doing this by accident. I'm not so sure sometimes. But folks, we really need to focus on this. And to your point of, I liked what you played there with Pierre Poilievre, and your point about no longer being holding back so much and worrying about, don't be offensive, don't be gross, but worrying about talking about things like gun rights, right? Worrying about talking about things like, blowing money during the lockdown. People should be confident enough to speak with their relatives and their friends about this sort of stuff now. And that would be my one little nugget of advice I would give people. And it gives you a little bit of hope and a little bit of agency of just have that confidence and that courage to actually broach some of these topics with people who aren't really that political. And it might help them decide what they want to do over the next few years when it comes to just being in so much debt, the lineups at the food banks, getting rid of something like the carbon tax. I think a lot of us need to realize that we don't need to hold back as much as perhaps we thought we used to.
Censorship doesn't come cheap. Neither does fighting to save the planet, as you pointed out here to us, Kris. The ambassador for climate change, which is not a role that existed and should exist because, climate change is not a country, believe it or not. But our Canadian ambassador to climate change, Catherine Stewart, has spent in the last less than 2 years $254,000 in travel expenses. This includes stays at luxury hotels, price tag up to $623 a night. But that's a lot of air travel for someone who is saying we all need to reduce our carbon footprint.
Yes, exactly. It's so well summed up in that famous cartoon. I don't know the artist who made it, but it shows what looks kind of like a farmer with like a trucker hat standing next to what I think is his son, and he's looking up in the sky, and it's just black with all these, airplane smoke trails. And he said, "What's that, Dad?" "Oh, politicians flying to the next climate summit." Exactly. And this lady, to your point, I forgot she existed. I pay her salary, and so do you, and so do all of your Canadian listeners and viewers, but I forgot she existed, number one. And now she's racking up these massive costs. Nothing says save the planet and do your part like sleeping in a $600 a night hotel. And again, it really cheapens the efforts that people earnestly make. Things like making sure a fish habitat is clean or trying to, protect an endangered species. When you let bureaucrats, permanent government, this lady was not elected to this job, blow your money like this under this greenwashing auspices of, climate change, it does two things. One, it wastes your money completely. Two, it weakens your argument. So the next time you're earnestly trying to say, you know what, maybe we should plant a few more trees. Let's make sure we have clean drinking water here. It sours people on helping the environment because they see what a scam this stuff is.
Yeah, and I was reading through her job description because I genuinely was curious what it was. And there were a number of points listed, so I don't want to oversimplify. But the first one that the government lists is coordinating with Canadian missions. So that's, embassies and permanent offices. Coordinating with Canadian missions to put the government of Canada's environmental policies into practice, particularly as those policies relate to climate change. So I'm just imagining her flying around to our embassies to make sure they're using LED light bulbs, basically. So, she flies to the embassy in, I don't know what the capital of Mozambique is. I apologize. She flies to our embassy there and says, "Oh, well, yep, you got rid of the coal furnace. Great." And then she flies to our UN mission in New York and says, "Oh, yep, you got the LEDs in. All right, I've saved the planet here."
Let's go inspect your low flush toilet. Let's make sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I can see her with that would be a good stunt. We should send her spools of weather stripping. So the next time she's visiting, she's
at some embassy, just like slap them across the windows
with a tape measure. There it is. They're really easy
She's
ones.
basically like those door-to-door energy efficiency audit salespeople now, but she's getting, $234,000 in travel expenses every 2 years to do it.
Yes, exactly. And again, it's one of those things, right, where, you imagine 250 grand. Like, think of the down payment on a house that people could make with that sort of stuff. Like, every single nickel is
Yeah.
coming out of taxpayers' money. Like, imagine your elderly aunt. Imagine, your cousin who's just trying to get his trade school going. Like, every nickel comes from their pockets. And
what do you have to show for it? And that's the crucial point here. Emissions have gone up in Canada. All of this government's environmental policy has not amounted to a hill of beans. All right, Kris Sims, we will talk to you next Monday. Thanks so much for coming on, as always.
You bet.
All right, we'll do the rare focus on Ontario here. It's a big province. It happens to be the province I live in here. And it is a province in which you are in a bit of a disadvantaged state if you want to buy alcohol right now. The LCBO, the State-Controlled Liquor Control Board of Ontario, literally it has control in the name, LCBO. The workers of that, unionized public servants under OPSEU, have gone on strike. And what's interesting is the level of propaganda you're getting from the union on this. This is a video that they put forward defending the LCBO monopoly. Take a look.
Hello, pores. I'm Callum. I may be rich, but I'm drowning in profits. That's why I want a big slice of the LCBO. Sure, they invest $2.5 billion in your community. That's basically nothing to me. Just like you, I struggle to have enough yachts. Just like you. I'm sad inside my mansion. I worked really hard to be born into money. Don't I deserve more of yours? I mean, what's a billionaire gotta do to get some extra zeros around here? Stop funding public services. Start funding me. No, I get it. I just don't see why we need schools and hospitals. Pick one. Who's going to both?
The core argument from OPSEU here is that the LCBO is putting $2.5 billion a year into roads and hospitals and schools. Now, this is based on a few assumptions that changing this monopoly would disrupt this. And there are a lot of flaws in that. But my goodness, the argument is just so incredibly disingenuous. Now, the PC government under Doug Ford has so far not wanted to bend the knee. In fact, Doug Ford put out this own video in that folksy Doug Ford way, talking about all the other places you can buy alcohol in this province.
More time in Ontario. That means more time outside with family and friends, at a neighborhood barbecue or a camping trip. Even though LCBO workers are on strike, there's still plenty of options for you to buy beer, wine, cider, coolers, and even spirits, including products made right here in Ontario. We've created this handy new map that shows what stores are open and what they sell. Say you want to buy some local Ontario craft beer. Just zoom in on where you are, click the filter for beer, and look at all the fantastic options that pop up. And look at all those yellow dots which show Ontario-made products. Click on one and you'll see the store's name and address as well as what they sell.
So that's good political comms from the Ontario government. Put a map forward to tell Ontarians, you don't need no stinking LCBO. But it's not doing anything about the structure of the problem here, which is that the LCBO is not a necessary entity in this province. I actually have a photo of Ontarians lining up outside an LCBO I wanted to share with you here. Oh, sorry, no, that's the Soviet bread line. Never mind. Scratch that. Thought I had the LCBO photo there. They're very similar sometimes. David Clement joins us. He is the North American Affairs Manager for the Consumer Choice Center, and I would say probably one of the LCBO's biggest critics, just as it's a fundamental structure here. David, good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start off with this $2.5 billion, because what OPSEU is trying to pretend here is that it's providing this great service to the people of Ontario, and we would just not have a functioning society. We wouldn't have a functioning welfare state if it weren't for the LCBO. And that is just patently untrue.
Yeah, it is untrue. Most people don't realize, apparently neither does the union, that the dividend the LCBO pays is primarily as the wholesaler. So all alcohol sold in the province whether it's at a restaurant, whether it's at a grocery store, whether it's at an actual winery that produces the wine. The LCBO tax on their markup. And so if you're at a winery, and most people don't know this, and kind of the light bulb goes off when I explain this. So if you're at a winery in Niagara, you buy a bottle of wine from that winery. You may often wonder, well, why is the price not better than at the LCBO?
Yeah, it was made 6 feet from here, right?
Yeah, it was made 6 feet from here. It never went into an LCBO warehouse. Well, this doesn't make any sense. It's because the LCBO includes their markup on all alcohol. That's where the revenue to the province comes from. It doesn't matter who sells it. In fact, if alcohol sales were to remain the same during the strike, so Ontarians bought the same amount of alcohol, the revenue to the province would go up, not down. It would go up because when you buy from a grocery store, you're not paying to keep the lights on at the 680 plus retail stores that the LCBO operates. And so the LCBO doesn't have to operate a single retail store in order to generate money. And we already know that this is true because the government had the choice to do exactly that for cannabis and they opted not to. Why? Because it's cheaper and more efficient not to, and it's more responsible for taxpayers in the province as a result. And so we have OPSU behaving as if those who want to get rid of the retail side of the LCBO are talking about some alternative reality that doesn't exist. And they're forgetting that Ontario doesn't have a single storefront retail for alcohol. The province doesn't physically sell a single tobacco product or vape, generate hundreds of millions of dollars off of that. Alberta has exactly the model that I'm talking about in terms of the province has a monopoly on wholesale, but allows for private retailers to sell the alcohol. BC has a mixed model, which is probably what Ontario would look like in transition, where you have government stores as well as private retailers existing. And so the idea that we need OPSU to generate the revenue for the province is just completely false.
Well, and I'll also make the point here that no one, I mean, you and I are proposing it, but no one in the Ontario government is even proposing abandoning the LCBO retail right now. The issue is allowing convenience stores to sell, some ready-made beverages here. Like, it actually will not jeopardize the OPSU workers' deal at all, except in the sense that it makes consumers aware that, oh yeah, maybe I prefer this. Maybe I prefer to go to this store that I'm already at buying a 2-liter bottle of Coke and also pick up my White Claws there.
Yeah, exactly. It's about convenience, and it may sound trivial to a certain extent, but it actually means quite a bit to be able to go grocery shopping and then pick up whatever else you might need on the beverage side. Now, I wish that the rollout in grocery stores and convenience stores was even larger. It should have included spirits as well. It doesn't. The LCBO under the new framework would maintain a monopoly on that. I don't think that they should have that. But yeah, it's they're holding drinkers in the province ransom now over ready to drink cocktails, and I think most people just see how ridiculous and silly that is.
And the arguments are always, anytime there's been a labor dispute, the arguments have always been ridiculous. Like, I know in the past, OPSU was really making it seem like they were the answer to drunk driving, that there would be drunk drivers on the streets in large numbers if LCBO unionized employees were not the ones that got to be the gatekeepers on alcohol purchases. And there's been no evidence to suggest that. And as evidenced by the fact that convenience store owners have tremendous penalties if they are caught selling tobacco to minors. And LCBO does not that. The liquor store is not losing its liquor license.
Correct. Yeah, the opposite is actually true. And I remember when they ran the campaigns when this corner store plan was first thought of when Doug Ford won. And there were these really nasty ads that, in my opinion, touched on some very uncomfortable stereotypes about who runs convenience stores.
Yes,
They were
yes.
really gross, very MAGA-esque in the stereotypical way of like really going after ethnic communities who often operate these stores on the premise that they weren't going to be responsible retailers in ID. But all of the secret shopper data actually suggests the opposite is true because they have skin in the game. if they don't ID for age-restricted goods, they get fined. If they get caught several times, they lose their ability to sell age-restricted goods completely. And that's, I mean, then your business model fails. So they have skin in the game. If an LCBO employee fails to ID, I don't know there are any ramifications at all. I mean,
No, and I used to work for the LCBO, and I wrote a column about this. And well, you could kind of get a slap on the wrist if you got caught. At the end of the day, there was no penalty for it, and certainly the store itself had no penalty or liability for it. And I wanted to ask you about where this is going to go, because Ontario consumers are now getting this, propaganda from the union. And I love that they try to make billionaires out to be the bad guys here, and not like some small business that wants to open up a wine and liquor store, some independent wine or liquor shop, some independent convenience store owner. Like, that to me is also an incredibly disingenuous part of this, is that, there are some corporate profits that are going to do well if Loblaws can sell vodka and whiskey and whatever, but there are a whole bunch of independent small businesses that could open up as well if we were to have a freer alcohol retail environment in this province. Yeah,
it would democratize commerce while generating the same, if not more, revenue for the province. Who would be against that? That is the most baffling thing. Is like, well, why would we want to keep predominantly small businesses out of the game just so that OPSU can maintain its retail monopoly for its LCBO cashiers? That's a bad deal. It's a bad deal for taxpayers, and it's a bad deal for consumers, because, again, this really only matters because they have that monopoly. If they didn't have that monopoly, they would go on strike, and the options for consumers, the alternatives for consumers, would be endless rather than being very limited. Now, the Ford government did release that map, which is certainly helpful, but it is significantly limited in terms of where you can buy specifically spirits, but I would also say most wines. You're not going to be able to buy most wines at the alternative stores because the LCBO still has the monopoly on where those are sold.
David Clement is the North American Affairs Manager over at the Consumer Choice Center. Great to talk to you, David. Thanks for coming on today.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All
right. All the best. That does it for us for today. We'll be back tomorrow, 23 hours and 15 minutes from now, with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show. If you're in Ontario, hopefully the dry July will end somewhat soon, or you can just use that Ontario government map. See, I actually have a very unique problem in that I don't really drink alcohol that much. I'm not a teetotaler. I just don't drink a lot, but I buy it a lot. So I have this huge inventory. So maybe I'll just open up my own, bootleg rum running type of operation here, and we'll just be like the Bronfman circa 1890 or whatever, and we'll just start like shoving stuff out the driveway at the back door in the middle of the night. Anyway, that does it for us for today. We'll talk to you all tomorrow. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.